Chapter 260. Morince 2867 said indifferently, Ian. Yang Feng became even more respectful, and his etiquette was meticulous. Yes, sir. Morince 2867 contemplated for a while before saying, I like the potions and prescriptions you offered very much. Since you're a wizard, I'll reward you with the title of Court Grand Master. Yang Feng was taken aback slightly, and then immediately said respectfully, Thank you, Your Majesty. Envious gazes focused on Yang Feng. There were many court wizards in the Morince Empire. Court wizards were divided into 5 ranks: Level 3 Court Master, Court Grand Master, Court Master, and Court Master Supervisor. Some Archwizard rank wizards could only become Level 3 Court Masters in the Imperial Palace of the Morince Empire. Court Grand Mages were existences that only the strongest magic shooters or legendary mages could become. For a trifling great wizard like Yang Feng to be able to become a Court Grand Master was both an honor and a great power. According to the custom of the Imperial Palace of the Morince Empire, a Court Grand Master had 1 Level 3 Court Master, 8 Level 2 Court Masters, and 50 Level 1 Court Masters as subordinates. In other words, once Yang Feng became a Court Grand Master, he would have 59 powerful wizards as subordinates. Of course, whether or not he could truly subdue the 59 powerful wizards as subordinates depended on Yang Feng's ability. In the Saint Toulon city, with the blessings of the gods and countless purification barriers, Yang Feng couldn't use the liquid metal nano-robots to control others. Otherwise, if he was careless and was discovered, the foundation he laid would be destroyed. After accepting the appointment, Yang Feng obediently retreated to the side of Busso among the courtiers. As a hereditary peer earl, he was also qualified to attend the court. Shortly after, the court meeting dispersed. Sir Earl Ian, His Majesty invites you to the Imperial study. Yang Feng was just about to leave, when an attendant came up to him and said respectfully. Yang Feng replied, Okay. Yang Feng followed the attendant through winding corridors and arrived at the Imperial study. Inside the Imperial study, only Morince 2867 sat on a chair and casually flipped through a memorial. Yang Feng performed an impeccable etiquette and then said, This humble subject Ian greets Your Majesty. Morince 2867 slowly turned around, looked at Yang Feng with his slightly turbid eyes, revealed an enigmatic smile, and said faintly, Ian, I heard that when you came to the Saint Toulon city, you were invited to the beautiful and Gaiety Inn by Garca and spent a wonderful night there. What did Garza talk to you about? Yang Feng was greatly alarmed, and countless thoughts revolved in his mind. Relying on the extraordinary perception of a Level 3 warlock, he could vaguely perceive that there were at least 6 legend rank forces locked onto him in the room. Once he made the slightest movement, he would be besieged by the 6 legend rank experts. Cold sweat trickled down Yang Feng's back. His thoughts revolved lightning fast, and he finally said honestly, His Royal Highness the 6th Prince invited this humble servant to the beautiful and Gaiety Inn in hopes that this humble servant will join his camp against the great prince and assist him in ascending to the throne. Morince 2867 asked seemingly carelessly, Did you agree to it? Yang Feng replied, Thanks to Governor Busso's recommendation, this humble servant was able to submit to Your Majesty and become the Earl of the Red Earth Wasteland. Therefore, this humble servant only hesitated slightly before agreeing to join His Royal Highness the 6th Prince's camp. Morince 2867 said with a chuckle, It was me, not Garca, who promised you the title of Earl of the Red Earth Wasteland. The one you should be loyal to is me, not him. Yang Feng bowed his head slightly and said respectfully, Yes. It was indeed Your Majesty who promised me the title of Earl of the Red Earth Wasteland. This humble servant is willing to serve Your Majesty until the day I die. Morince 2867 was an incapable ruler who killed without batting an eyelid and did as he pleased. As long as his bottom line wasn't crossed, Yang Feng didn't want to disobey him. Yang Feng said resolutely, If Your Majesty wants this humble servant to leave His Royal Highness the 6th Prince's camp, then this humble servant will immediately sever all ties with them. Compared to his own life, The friendship between Yang Feng and the sixth Prince Garca was simply not worth mentioning. Morince 2867 nodded with satisfaction and said meaningfully, "No need. Since you've promised Garca, assist him well." Yang Feng heaved a long sigh of relief. He felt that the clothes on his back were already soaked with sweat, yet he said respectfully, "Yes. Your Majesty." Accompanying a ruler was like accompanying a tiger. Morince 2867, this incapable ruler, was extremely dangerous. If he didn't handle it well, he might be killed. Morince 2867 said faintly, "Okay, if there's nothing else, you can take your leave." Yang Feng suddenly said, "Your Majesty, this humble servant has a matter to report." Morince 2867 said indifferently, "Speak." Yang Feng said respectfully, "This humble servant wants to open a magic college in the St. Talon city to cultivate magic talents for the empire. This humble servant would like to invite your Majesty to be the dean of this magic college." The inheritance of magic on the Feisua plain was very ancient. In addition to the churches and the court wizards cultivated by the empire, there were only some loose magic organizations formed by wizards. Apprentice wizards were discovered by wizards during their travels, or recommended by acquaintances, before they were accepted and nurtured, or passed on in the form of a wizard family. Generally, a wizard would take no more than 4 apprentice wizards with him. This inheritance method resulted in a very small number of wizards in the world. A long time ago, the Xianxia Plain also used this inheritance method. However, the academy style eventually replaced this ancient inheritance method and became the mainstream of the major forces of the Xianxia Plain. Morince 2867 pondered for a while, then suddenly said with a smile, "A magic college? Sure. However, I won't pay a penny for the magic college." Yang Feng said with a smile, "No problem, I'll cover all the expenses." Morince 2867 said somewhat impatiently, "Okay. You can take your leave." Yang Feng said respectfully, "Yes. Your Majesty." Morince 2867 picked up a vial of dragon-built elixir and drank it. His spirit was suddenly roused, and as if he had regained his youth, he was brimming with strength. What a great elixir! Morince 2867 gave a long sigh, then revealed a joyful expression and turned towards the harem. When he stepped out of the gate of the imperial palace, Yang Feng felt his body loosen up. For a warlock like Yang Feng, who pursued truth and freedom, the feeling of having his fate hanging in the balance was extremely uncomfortable. Inside the Victory Palace, except for Divine Chosen, the upper echelon of the churches, and the patriarchs of divine descendants hidden in the Morince Empire, everyone else was an ant in front of Morince 2867. With an order from him, he could turn those ants into corpses, and even legend rank powerhouses were no exception. Morince 2867, on the other hand, wasn't even a knight rank powerhouse. This was the power of influence. "Ian, stop right there." Yang Feng had just left the imperial palace not far away, when a tall, pretty, and heroic girl dressed in a blue warrior's attire, with her hair tied up in a blue ponytail and a sword at her waist blocked in front of him and glared at him angrily. Behind the pretty, blue-haired girl followed 6 young men with swords at their waists and extraordinary auras. The 6 young men looked at Yang Feng with indignation in their eyes. Yang Feng frowned slightly and asked faintly, "Who are you?" The pretty, blue-haired girl said indignantly, "Jiran is my father's chief disciple. You actually crippled him. Is there still any law?" "So that's how it is." Yang Feng showed a smile of contempt and said faintly, "If I committed a crime, you can report it to the Imperial Guard Hall. Now, get out of the way, you're blocking my way. You commoners are blocking the way of a greater aristocrat. According to the law of the Empire, you're punishable by 30 lashes." When he said that, the momentum of the 6 young men behind the pretty, blue-haired girl deflated. Only then did they remember that the man in front of them was a genuine greater aristocrat of the empire. According to the law of the Morince Empire, Commoners blocking the way of a greater aristocrat was a crime and would be fined 10 gold coins and whipped 30 times. In the Morince Empire, commoners couldn't compete with greater aristocrats. This was the reason why countless people racked their brains to become aristocrats. The complexion of a young man changed and he whispered, "Becky, let's go. He's a greater aristocrat. If he screams, it'll be troublesome." The black-skinned dogs of the guard hall are the lackeys of greater aristocrats. The policemen of the Morince Empire's guard hall wore black uniforms. In the mouths of many people of the lower class, the policemen were known as black-skinned dogs. "I'm not afraid of him. My father is the lightning sacred swordsman. He's just an earl, what's so great about him? You cowards, watch me teach him a lesson." Becky was annoyed. She barked, erupted with Sky Knight rank chi, blurred into motion, and shot towards Yang Feng lightning fast. Since Yang Feng was a greater aristocrat, she was also apprehensive, not even daring to draw her sword. She just wanted to catch Yang Feng and teach him a lesson. Interesting. Yang Feng smiled and immediately shouted, "Someone is trying to assassinate a greater aristocrat. Someone is trying to assassinate a greater aristocrat. Someone is trying to assassinate a greater aristocrat. Who? Who dares to assassinate a greater aristocrat?" The 4 policemen who were patrolling nearby immediately rushed over anxiously, and while shouting, they madly blew their sirens. Chapter 261. The policemen were like ants on a hot pan, quickly rushing over from all directions. If it was an ordinary person, then it wouldn't be a big deal. However, if a greater aristocrat was assassinated in the middle of the street, then the surrounding policemen wouldn't be able to rescue him and they would lose their jobs. If the relatives and subordinates of the greater aristocrat vented their anger on them, then the policemen might end up in a miserable state. Dozens of police officers came from all directions and surrounded them. Furthermore, the sound of sirens kept ringing, summoning their companions. Yang Feng extended his hand and directly blocked Becky's fist. A touch of captivating redness welled up on his face and he spat out a mouthful of blood. "I am His Majesty the Emperor personally conferred the title of Earl Ian of the Red Earth Wasteland. These people are trying to assassinate me, quickly catch them." Yang Feng spat out a mouthful of blood and took a dozen steps back. Pointing at Becky's group of 7, he shouted loudly, took out his aristocratic badge, and threw it at a level 3 supervisor who had just arrived at the scene. "Stop. Stop your atrocities. Surrender at once, or we'll kill you on the spot on the charge of assassinating a greater aristocrat. If you continue to resist, then your family members will be imprisoned on the charge of treason." After carefully examining Yang Feng's aristocratic badge, the level 3 supervisor's complexion changed slightly, and he pointed at Becky's group of 7 and shouted loudly. Becky's group of 7 immediately didn't dare to budge. They were all Sky Knight rank experts or above. If they went on a killing spree, then they could kill the dozens of policemen present. However, in addition to a large number of ordinary policemen, the Imperial Guard Hall also had a special force called the Sword of Justice. The Sword of Justice's special force was composed of Knight rank experts or above, and there were even 5 legend rank sacred swordsmen serving in the Sword of Justice. Once the Imperial Guard Hall dispatched the Sword of Justice's special force, then even the lightning sacred swordsmen wouldn't dare to confront them head-on. On the Feisua plain, experts were as common as clouds. Therefore, the various powerful departments of the Morince Empire were similarly full of experts. Otherwise, the order of the empire couldn't be maintained. Becky defended herself loudly. "I am Becky, the daughter of the lightning sacred swordsman. We didn't assassinate Ian." As if a victim greater aristocrat, Yang Feng said in an impassioned voice, "So it was the lightning sacred swordsman who ordered it. Previously, I accidentally injured a commoner called Jiran, who is the chief disciple of the lightning sword saint. Now, for the sake of that disciple, he actually instigated his own daughter to assassinate me. He's really crazy. Sword of Justice, I need the special police protection of the Sword of Justice." "No, I request that the garrison hall immediately send out the special police force of the Sword of Justice to capture the Lightning Sword Saint. The rank 3 supervisor felt a headache coming on. On the Feisua Plain, sacred swordsmen were one of the strongest experts under the demigod rank. Ordinary people wouldn't dare to offend such an existence. As long as those legendary sword saints didn't do anything outrageous, very few people would find trouble with them. However, Yang Feng was a hereditary peer-grader aristocrat of the Morin's Empire with a noble status and extremely powerful power. He was also an existence that a rank 3 supervisor could not contend with. The rank 3 supervisor was also a very smart person. He quickly said, "Earl Ian, the Sword of Justice isn't something that a small rank 3 supervisor like me can make the decision. If you really need to mobilize the Sword of Justice, please apply to the higher-ups." Yang Feng used aristocratic arrogance to point at Becky and them and said lightly, "Good. However, these people tried to assassinate me in the middle of the street. The evidence is conclusive, you all saw it. Go and capture them all." The rank 3 supervisor's face sank and he said coldly, "You all heard it. Drop your weapons and surrender at once, or we'll kill you on the spot on the charge of assassinating a greater aristocrat. If you continue to resist, then your family members will be imprisoned on the charge of treason. Of course, as long as you surrender, we'll allow you to hire a lawyer to defend you in court." The 6 young men looked at each other, smiled bitterly, took the swords hanging at their waists, and threw them aside. More than a dozen policemen quickly rushed up and handcuffed the 6 young men. Becky shouted unwillingly, "How can you do this? He only said a few words, yet you came to arrest us. Based on what?" The corners of Yang Feng's mouth rose slightly and he said lightly, "Based on what? Based on the fact that I'm a greater aristocrat, while you're just a bunch of commoners." When he heard this, the rank 3 supervisor remained silent, as if he hadn't heard anything. No matter what he thought, he could only remain silent in the face of a hereditary peer earl. "Earl Ian, why are you so calculative with a child?" A gentle voice suddenly sounded from the side. A middle-aged man dressed in a blue warrior's attire, with a medium build, short blue hair, a sword at his waist, ordinary looks, and traces of vicissitudes of life on his face slowly walked over. As if there was an invisible force surrounding the middle-aged man, everyone who saw the middle-aged man unconsciously made way for him. When the policemen saw the middle-aged man, as if they were struck by lightning, they trembled and took a few steps back. When Yang Feng saw the middle-aged man, alarm bells went off in his mind. The terrifying perception of a level 3 warlock constantly reminded him that the middle-aged man was very dangerous. In Yang Feng's eyes, the middle-aged man seemed to have become the incarnation of a peerless sword, a mysterious aura firmly locked onto his throat, as if a sword was pressed against his neck at all times. Yang Feng's eyes flashed with a touch of graveness and he said slowly, "Lightning Sacred Swordsman Cassius." The area within 10 meters was the domain of sacred swordsmen. On the Feisua Plain, unless a spell was conjured beforehand, most legend wizards would die once a sacred swordsman got within 10 meters of them. Even on the Xianxia Plain, once a sacred swordsman got close to them, even great warlock rank experts would fall. Once a sacred swordsman stepped into the legend realm, their swords would possess a trace of the power of laws, making them extraordinary and peerlessly sharp. Even the formidable life force field that surrounded great warlocks couldn't withstand it. When the lightning sacred swordsman Cassius wasn't angry, he looked like an ordinary middle-aged man. But once he urged his power, he would be like a sword god, peerlessly sharp and unstoppable. As Cassius walked calmly towards Yang Feng, countless people retreated. It seemed as if Yang Feng was the only one left to face the sacred swordsman. Cassius' gaze was dull, yet it contained a frightening sword intent. It locked on Yang Feng's vitals, stabbing Yang Feng's vitals painfully. Alarms went off all over his body, and he almost couldn't help but press his dimensional crest and release those level 4 extraordinary life form rank mechanical battle beasts. Yang Feng suddenly said with a faint smile, "Lightning Sacred Swordsman Cassius, are you here to assassinate me? I remember that you seem to have a 70-year-old mother, a beautiful wife, and 2 brothers. Your two brothers have a son and two daughters respectively. Your family has a total of 132 people. There are a total of 587 people attached to your family. Are you here to kill me because you want them to accompany me in death, and then wander the world by yourself? Cassius' gaze constricted slightly, and a frightening sword intent erupted in a flash, nearly chopping Yang Feng into countless pieces. Yang Feng, however, looked at Cassius with an unruly expression, sneered repeatedly, and didn't say a word. Cassius silently looked at Yang Feng. Finally, his eyes flashed with a touch of helplessness, and he smiled bitterly. The sword intent converged and disappeared. No, I just came to pick up my daughter. I think there should be a small misunderstanding between us. Sacred swordsmen were also people, and they had parents, brothers, relatives, and friends. These fetters were like shackles that shackled sacred swordsmen. So long as he wasn't forced into a desperate situation, Cassius would never risk the execution of his entire family to kill a greater aristocrat in public. The Level 3 superintendent heaved a long sigh of relief. His back was drenched in cold sweat, and his clothes were drenched in sweat. One was a human sacred swordsman with peerless swordsmanship, and the other was a hereditary peer-greater aristocrat with great power. Both sides weren't existences that he could easily offend. Now that the two of them had eased up, he heaved a slight sigh of relief. Cassius, since you said that this is a misunderstanding, then I'll treat it as a misunderstanding. I can cure Jiran. If you want to cure him, then take your daughter and come with me. Yang Feng gave Cassius a meaningful look with a faint smile, then turned around and walked towards the villa he lived in. Becky glared at Yang Feng's back with some anger and said coquettishly, "Father, how can he be so arrogant? He's so annoying." Cassius' eyes flashed with a mixture of envy and jealousy, and he sighed faintly, because he's a greater aristocrat. Even though the lightning sacred swordsman Cassius had unparalleled swordsmanship, and as long as he was within 10 meters, even a legend wizard would find it hard to block his sword strike, but he was still a commoner, not an aristocrat, let alone a hereditary peer-greater aristocrat. With the cultivation base of the lightning sacred swordsman Cassius, if he sought refuge with the court, he could obtain the title of a court aristocrat and some of the privileges of an aristocrat. However, it was still very difficult to become a hereditary peer aristocrat. Because the Morince Empire had a heritage of more than 100,000 years, if a legend rank powerhouse was directly conferred the title of a hereditary peer aristocrat, then the Morince Empire would have already been carved up. Greater aristocrats were the lifelong goal of many sacred swordsmen in the Morince Empire. Becky, let's go. Cassius looked at Yang Feng's back with a flicker in his eyes. He was silent for a while, and then said slowly. Becky admired her sacred swordsman father the most since childhood, so she naturally wouldn't disobey him. Yes, father. Chapter 262. The huge villa in the St. Toulon city, which could accommodate all of Yang Feng's subordinates, had been purchased by Busso. Inside the villa, in a luxuriously decorated room, Yang Feng sat on a tiger-skin sofa. Sitting opposite him were Cassius and his daughter. Yang Feng said with a faint smile, "Jiran was accidentally injured by me when he challenged me. According to the laws of the Empire, I have no obligation to treat him. However, I have always been a generous person. 6 million gold coins, as long as you can give me 6 million gold coins, then I'll treat him." Becky was startled and exclaimed, 6 million gold coins? How can we come up with so much money? Cassius couldn't help but frown slightly. Human sacred swordsmen were humans living in the secular world. They weren't immortals, nor were they gods who lived high up in the star-divine country and didn't have to worry about money. Human sacred swordsmen also had to work, or have their own businesses, in order to earn money. Generally, sacred swordsmen would open dojos and accept children of greater aristocrats as apprentices. Or they would directly seek refuge with the court and serve as the court's lackeys. Of the 5 legend-rank sacred swordsmen of the Sword of Justice, 2 of them were experts who later sought refuge with the court. Cassius also made a living by opening a dojo. The total assets of his family were more than 1 million gold coins, but the liquid funds were only over 100,000 gold coins. He didn't lack small amounts of money, but he couldn't come up with such a huge sum as 6 million gold coins. Yang Feng said lightly, "It's a precious elixir that can restore a damaged dantian and restore qi. Naturally, the price can't be low. If you don't want to, you can also ask the popes of the temples. As long as they cast the level 4 divine spell Great Praise of Life, Jiran's injuries can also be healed." The level 4 divine spell Great Praise of Life was one of the strongest healing divine spells of the temples. Once cast, no matter what kind of injury it was, it could be quickly healed within a day. The person who had one foot in the gates of hell would be pulled out. Such a powerful theurgy could only be performed by the popes of the various shrines or the pinnacle powerhouses among the cardinals. Besides, they would have to pay a huge price to perform such a powerful recovery theurgy. Basically, no one would perform such a powerful theurgy for a mere star night. Becky was so choked that she couldn't speak. The popes and cardinals of the various shrines were all extremely revered figures. Even if Cassius begged, the popes of the major shrines would never agree to cast such a powerful recovery magic on Jiran. After all, Cassius had experienced countless storms and waves. He said calmly, "Earl Ian, since you asked us to come here, you must have the intention to treat Jiran. Please state your terms." Yang Feng smiled and revealed his true intentions. "I can cure Jiran. However, I hope that you can become my retainer and work for me." Cassius said meaningfully, "Earl Ian, do you know how many great nobles have tried to recruit me over the years?" Yang Feng shook his head slightly. Cassius said faintly, "A total of 137 great nobles have tried to recruit me and have me work for them. However, my family didn't agree either. I can't think of any reason to work for you." Yang Feng said unhurriedly, "That's only because they can't offer you something that can tempt you. Cassius, I can make you an aristocrat." Cassius smiled faintly, but didn't speak. If he was willing to join the court of the Morince Empire and become its lackey, he could easily obtain the title of a court earl, become a court aristocrat, and enjoy all the rights of an aristocrat. The corners of Yang Feng's mouth rose slightly, and he continued, "I can make you a hereditary peer aristocrat." Cassius' eyelids twitched slightly, and his eyes flashed with a touch of graveness. Hereditary peer aristocrats could be passed down from generation to generation and had their own fief. Even a trifling hereditary peer knight was considered to have truly stepped into the aristocratic class. Yang Feng said with a smile, "If you side with me, I can divide a fief and recommend you to the empire as a chevalier, becoming a member of the hereditary peer aristocracy." Cassius' heart thumped, and ripples appeared in his originally calm and tranquil eyes. He, who grew up in the Morince Empire, understood how difficult it was to obtain a hereditary peer aristocrat. In their fief, a hereditary peer aristocrat was like a local tyrant. As long as they paid a certain amount of gold coins to the royal family every year, they could do whatever they wanted. Furthermore, they could legally form a private army of less than 200 people to guard their fief. An aristocrat with the title of a hereditary peer aristocrat was qualified to join the circle of first-rate aristocrats and become a member of the exclusive aristocrats. Although Cassius was the lightning sacred swordsman and possessed formidable martial prowess, greater aristocrats came to recruit him. However, he was very clear that they came to recruit him in order to get a powerful thug and bodyguard, not a companion on the same level as them. One of the important reasons why Cassius wasn't willing to side with greater aristocrats was that when he aged and his strength declined to a certain extent. As a thug, it was very likely that he would be abandoned or even eliminated by his master. Yang Feng said with a faint smile, "If you make enough contributions, I can even help you become a hereditary peer baron and make you a member of the true aristocracy. You know, the Red Earth wasteland is extremely vast. Dividing a fief is nothing for me." Hereditary peer baron. Cassius' eyes erupted with a scorching glint, his heart pounded madly, and his blood flowed frantically. Unless the sacred swordsman who sided with the Morince Empire made great contributions, otherwise, after serving the empire for a lifetime, they might only get 1 or 2 fiefs and become an aristocrat. Only the luckier ones might get a fief and let their descendants step into the aristocratic class. The title of hereditary peer baron only appeared in the founding years of the Mauryan Empire, or in the most critical battles when the Mauryan Empire engaged in a large-scale war with its old enemy, the Titan Empire, or when a demonic plague or a sea disaster swept the world. Yang Feng said faintly, "How about this, if you're willing to side with me and fight for me wholeheartedly? Even if you die in battle, I'll guarantee that your son or daughter will become a hereditary peer baron. Of course, a hereditary peer baron is only the bottom line. If you make enough contributions, it's not impossible for you to go a step further and become a hereditary peer viscount. We can go to the Temple of Contracts to notarize this promise." Cassius' mouth suddenly went dry, and his eyes flickered with ecstasy. Hereditary peer viscount. In the Mauryan Empire, aristocrats with hereditary peer earl titles and above were called greater aristocrats and had great power. Aristocrats with hereditary peer baron titles and above were considered true aristocrats. Hereditary peer viscounts, on the other hand, were considered quasi-greater aristocrats. Some powerful hereditary peer viscounts could even be accepted into the circle of greater aristocrats and become a member of true greater aristocrats. Cassius couldn't resist such a huge temptation. In the Mauryan Empire, apart from the emperor and some top aristocratic families with a long history, no one could offer a fief to recruit a sacred swordsman. After contemplating for a while, Cassius's eyes flashed with a touch of firmness and he said solemnly, "Earl Ian, if you can fulfill your promise, then I'm willing to join you and become your retainer. This is the contract. Take a look and see if there are any problems." Yang Feng smiled, then took out a contract and handed it to Cassius. Cassius took the contract and looked at it carefully for a while. His eyes flashed with a touch of a complicated glint, and he said faintly, "Sir Earl, it seems that you have prepared this contract. So the misunderstanding between you and my daughter is also part of your plan?" Becky was startled and looked at Yang Feng with a bit of fear in her beautiful eyes. Yang Feng said with a smile, "No, I just took advantage of the situation, that's all. Of course, if you hadn't come, I would have had other options. Sacred Gale Swordsman, Sacred Gale Swordsman, Sacred Flame Swordsman, Sacred Windfire Swordsman, there are dozens of sacred swordsmen in the St. Toulon city who haven't been recruited yet. If I visited them one by one, I would eventually be able to recruit 2 or 3 sacred swordsmen." Cassius contemplated for a while before finally nodding slightly. Obtaining a lordship and directly promoting to a hereditary lordship was a great temptation for the legendary sacred swordsmen in the St. Toulon city. Compared to legend wizards who wholeheartedly delved into all kinds of knowledge and possessed great wealth, sacred swordsmen were more susceptible to the temptation of power and wealth. Legend rank powerhouses were also people. They had their own families and friends, and they also wanted to stand out. There were also sacred swordsmen who wholeheartedly pursued the pinnacle of martial arts. However, even more sacred swordsmen pursued fame and wealth, and threw themselves into the Mauryan Empire's imperial court or greater aristocratic families. On the Feisua plain, gods stood aloof and looked down on mortals. The imperial family, greater aristocrats, and churches jointly controlled the world. It was a society with a strict hierarchy. Even though sacred swordsmen were tyrannical in martial arts, but they could only climb up step by step in this strict social system. People who were tyrannical in martial arts didn't necessarily have a high social status and live a better life. Hereditary peer aristocrats, on the other hand, had a high social status. As long as they weren't too stupid, they would live a good life. Yang Feng said with a smile, "Then let's go to the Temple of Contracts and sign a fair contract under the witness of the mighty god of contracts." Cassius was also somewhat impatient. He got up and then smiled awkwardly to conceal the anxiety in his heart, saying, "Okay." Chapter 263. I have people prepare all kinds of documents and had Busso deliver them to the aristocratic senate. After about half a month, you'll become a hereditary peer of the empire. After coming out of the contract temple, Yang Feng said to Cassius with a smile. Cassius looked grateful and changed the way he addressed Yang Feng. "Thank you, my lord." Yang Feng said with a smile, "Becky, in a few days, you'll be a real aristocratic lady." Aristocratic lady? Becky was a little excited when she heard that. At the same time, she revealed a trace of melancholy. From the day Becky became sensible, Cassius was already a sacred swordsman. She had always been proud of her father, a sacred swordsman. She believed that her father was the greatest person in the world. However, when Becky was 12 years old, she had a taste of the cruelty of this strict society. She was rejected by the St. Violet School, the most famous all-girls school in the St. Toulon city, because she wasn't a descendant of an aristocrat. That was the first time she understood that her sacred swordsman father wasn't an omnipotent being. In this world, there was no existence that the sword of a sacred swordsman couldn't sever. However, the sword of a sacred swordsman couldn't sever the invisible barrier between aristocrats and commoners. As Becky grew older, she became more aware of the heavy weight of the word aristocracy in the Morince Empire. The person she once had a crush on chose a girl who was inferior to her in all aspects because that girl had aristocratic blood. A position that she valued was easily snatched away by an aristocratic girl. In social occasions, many people would marvel at her father, the sacred swordsman Cassius. However, it was the aristocratic ladies who were the most popular, not her, the daughter of a sacred swordsman. Becky looked at Yang Feng, who she despised before, but now became her father's lord. She wanted to say something but then hesitated. She didn't say anything. Yang Feng naturally didn't care about Becky. He turned to Cassius and asked, "Cassius, I still want to recruit a few powerful sacred swordsmen. In the St. Toulon city, which sacred swordsman can I recruit?" As a sacred swordsman, Cassius was qualified to enter the small circle of sacred swordsmen. He knew far more than Yang Feng. Cassius pondered for a moment before saying, "Wind and Fire Sacred Swordmaster Adio, Earth Sacred Swordmaster Magia, Raging Waves Sacred Swordmaster Lucero, Sea Sacred Swordmaster Mahano, Violet Sacred Swordmaster Nidio, and Lily Sacred Swordmaster Musica. These 7 sacred swordmasters have hopes of being recruited by his lordship." In the St. Toulon city, most of the sacred swordsmen had joined the court, entered various powerful institutions, or been recruited by major aristocrats. There were only a few dozen sword saints among the commoners. Among the dozens of sword saints, there were indeed some sword saints who were indifferent to fame and fortune and wholeheartedly focused on cultivating martial skills. At the same time, there were also sword saints who could not be recruited for various reasons. Yang Feng suddenly asked, "Can I recruit the Broken Star's sacred swordsman Penavir?" Star-breaking sacred swordsman Painaville was recognized as the #1 powerhouse among the countless sacred swordsmen in the St. Toulon city. He pursued the pinnacle of swordsmanship all his life. Ever since he stepped into the legend rank, he had never been defeated. He once went to the Beastman Empire and killed a sacred warrior, entered the Desert Empire and killed a sacred barbarian, and went to the Titan Empire and killed the #1 sacred swordsman of the Titan Empire. Since 20 years ago, the Broken Star sacred swordsman Penavir was recognized as the #1 human sacred swordsman. According to legend, so long as he had a sword in his hand, he could even slay a demigod. The physique of human sacred swordsmen was fundamentally inferior to that of human warlocks. The lifespan of a sacred swordsman was between 120 and 150 years old. When he was young, the Broken Star sacred swordsman Penavir had a fortuitous encounter and drank a bottle of life water left in the secular world by the intermediate divine power rank goddess of life Cornelia of the Zalia divine system. His lifespan was extended by 100 years. Now that he was 70 years old, the Broken Star sacred swordsman Penavir was at the peak of his strength, and he was recognized as one of the strongest human experts below the demigod rank. Many people speculated that the sword in the hands of the Broken Star sacred swordsman Penavir could even slay a demigod. No matter the plane, there would always be peerless geniuses, unimaginable peerless geniuses. The Broken Star sacred swordsman Penavir was such a peerless swordsman genius that surpassed the imagination of many people. Cassius shook his head with some admiration, jealousy, and envy, saying, "Impossible, my lord. There was once a divine descendant family that offered a hereditary peer viscount, yet was still unable to recruit the Broken Star Sacred Swordsman. He's the kind of freak that can sacrifice everything for the sake of martial arts. On the Feisua plane, after all, there were still some peerless powerhouses who regarded fame and fortune as dirt and wholeheartedly pursued the pinnacle of cultivation. Most of such peerless powerhouses were legend wizards who pursued the truth. However, there was no lack of sacred swordsmen and other experts of other professions. Yang Feng smiled and said carelessly, "In that case, help me probe the 7 sacred swordsmen first. If they are willing to become my retainers, then I'll talk with them in detail." Cassius nodded slightly and said, "Yes, my lord." Yang Feng's eyes flashed with a brilliant glint, and he said slowly, "Before that, come with me. Some things are better dealt with as soon as possible." Cassius said, "Yes, my lord." Not far from Yang Feng's villa, in a luxurious hotel, Edith held Faldina in his arms and was whispering sweet nothings. Suddenly, a foot kicked the door of the room, she erupted, and there was a loud bang. The door of the room was torn apart, and countless fragments splashed in all directions. Dressed in silver police uniforms with a silver sword tattooed on the shoulder of the right hand, police officers from the Special Police Force of the Sword of Justice broke through the door in an instant and occupied various strategic locations. A middle-aged man with a hooked nose, hawk-like eyes, a burly figure, short blue hair, and a well-groomed mustache stepped into the room, glanced at Edith, and said faintly, "Edith, you did well. You finally lured the witch designated by His Majesty here." Faldina's heart shook greatly. Her beautiful eyes were full of incredulity as she stared at Edith. Edith's complexion changed greatly, and he shouted, "No, Faldina, you have to believe me. I definitely didn't betray you. I really didn't betray you. I can swear on my life." So that's how it is. The first successor of the Hansen family colluded with a witch from the Titan Empire. Lord Desser, please report this matter to His Majesty the Great Emperor fairly. There are so many witnesses here. Following a chuckle, Yang Feng slowly stepped into the spacious room and smiled as he looked at Faldina and Edith embracing each other. Desser was the middle-aged man with a well-groomed mustache. He was also one of the 5 sacred swordsmen of the Sword of Justice. He was also one of the 5 tycoons of the Sword of Justice. When he heard Yang Feng's words, Dassault's eyebrows wrinkled tightly. He was well aware that once the first successor of the Hansen family colluded with a witch from the Titan Empire, it would cause a huge storm if Moritz 2867th learned of it. If he didn't handle it well, the entire Hansen family would be at risk of being destroyed. As he was a good friend of the Hansen family, he naturally couldn't sit idly by and watch such a thing happen. Dassault's face sank and he said coldly, "Earl Ian, the Sword of Justice is handling a case. Please be quiet. If you can't be quiet, then please leave." Yang Feng said with a meaningful smile, "Okay, I'll watch you handle the case impartially. By the way, His Majesty has officially appointed me as a Court Grand Master. You can also call me Court Grand Master Ian." Dassault's heart shook, and he went silent for a moment. Yang Feng became a Court Grand Master, which meant that he had the grace to have an audience with Moritz 2867th. At the same time, he was a member of the Moritz Empire's imperial court system, serving His Majesty directly and wielding great power. As long as he didn't make a mistake, Dassault had no right to drive him away. Eyes bloodshot, Edith drew his sword, pointed it at Yang Feng and roared, "It's you! Ian, you betrayed us. You fiend, you bastard." Yang Feng took a few steps back, glanced at Edith, and said with a contemptuous smile, "Sir Dassault, I seem to hear someone threatening me." Dassault glared and barked, "Edith, don't mess around. Hurry up and capture the Titan Empire's witch behind you. His Majesty designated her as a criminal. Think about the Hansen family." "No, never. I'll never hand over Faldina." Eyes shot with blood, Edith bellowed, urged his pinnacle star knight rank chi, and his sword transformed into specks of stars and stabbed at Dassault. Only by forcing the legend rank sacred swordsman Dassault away could Edith and them hope to escape. When the fearsome star Qi erupted, a violent hurricane was set off in the room, and countless furniture and decorations were overturned and smashed to pieces. Fool! Dassault's eyes widened, then he roared and unsheathed his sword, and a brilliant sword ray hit the endless stars. The endless stars shattered, and Edith was forced back a few steps by the fearsome backlash. Yang Feng exclaimed in admiration, "Amazing! What an exquisite swordsmanship! The reputation of a sacred swordsman is well-deserved." Edith's swordsmanship was above that of Yang Feng's, yet his swordsmanship was broken by Dassault's sword strike. This meant that Yang Feng's demonic fighting sword art couldn't withstand a single blow from Dassault. Edith bit his lip. As if a madman, countless star sword rays lit up again and stabbed at Dassault. Chapter 264. Streaks of starry sword light lit up. It was as if countless stars were falling down to the mortal world with an aura of destruction. Everyone present was shocked when they saw the star-like sword light. They couldn't help but feel a sense of dejection that they couldn't defeat. The terrifying and exquisite star sword light had just emerged when a long sword lightly stabbed into the star sword light, directly breaking the countless star sword lights. The starry sword rays flickered and then collapsed. Every time Edith's swordsmanship was broken, he was forced back a few steps, spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face turned pale. Even though he was a peerless genius with extraordinary swordsmanship, but he still couldn't resist a sword strike from a sacred swordsman. Faldina's beautiful eyes turned cold. She silently recited an incantation and concentrated her mind. Suddenly, a sharp pain came from her head, giving her a splitting headache. She couldn't conjure spells. Her gaze fell on Yang Feng, only to see Yang Feng revealing a trace of a smile of ridicule and contempt towards her. Faldina wanted to say something, but when she saw Edith fighting to the death, she fell silent again. She was a very smart woman, and she knew that she couldn't disturb Edith now. The Sword of Justice secret police in the room were also silent. Standing quietly aside, they didn't have the slightest intention of arresting Faldina. Only if Edith personally arrested Faldina could the accusation of collusion between the Hansen family and the Titan empires which be cleared. Dassault broke Edith's sword rays 24 times in a row. More and more blood flowed out of his body, and his eyes became brighter and brighter. When the starry sword rays lit up for the 25th time, the countless stars formed from the sword rays carried the power of law. The countless stars flickered and instantly formed a sword of stars surrounded by starry light, which stabbed at Dassault's sword. Ding! With a loud sound, sacred swordsman Dassault's sword was deflected. The sacred swordsman boundary. He actually broke through and reached the sacred swordsman boundary. Dassault's eyes flashed with astonishment, and he exclaimed, "Edith, the first successor of the Hansen family, was a genius in martial cultivation and even more so in swordsmanship." Even Dassault didn't expect him to promote to a sacred swordsman so quickly and to comprehend it in the middle of a fight. Even on the Feisua plane, people who could directly break through in the middle of a fight were geniuses among geniuses, freaks among geniuses. After repelling Dassault with a sword strike, Edith didn't continue to pursue. His eyes shimmered with killing intent as deep as the sea, and a star sword ray flickered and mercilessly stabbed at the smiling Yang Feng standing aside. He didn't need to guess to know that the arrival of the Sword of Justice secret police was related to Yang Feng. Dassault's eyes flickered a few times, and his thoughts revolved lightning fast. He covered his chest with one hand, forced himself to spit out a mouthful of blood, and watched helplessly as the starlight sword ray stabbed towards Yang Feng, and a smile appeared in the abyss of his eyes. Within 10 meters was the domain of a sacred. Once a sacred swordsman entered within 10 meters of them, then even a legend wizard or a great warlock rank expert would be insta-killed if they didn't prepare a defensive spell in advance. In Dassault as of Yang Feng, AA of. Yang Feng looked at the star sword ray and exclaimed in admiration, "Amazing! This is a genius among geniuses. To be able to break through a great realm in the middle of a fight, that's really amazing." The cultivation methods of the Zhangji Plains warlocks were different from those of many plains. Every time a warlock advanced to a great realm, they had to find a safe place, absorb countless life magic energy, and condense a more powerful spell model inside their spirit sea. It was impossible to directly comprehend and break through a great realm in the middle of a fight. Just when everyone present thought that Yang Feng was dead for sure, a resplendent ray of lightning shot out from behind Yang Feng and stabbed at the star sword ray. Boom! Along with a blare, the star sword ray was shattered, and Edith was jolted back a few steps, a look of incredulity on his face. All eyes gathered behind Yang Feng. A person slowly walked out from behind Yang Feng. It was the lightning's sacred swordsman Cassius. When Daoism saw Cassius, his pupils constricted slightly, and he whispered, "Lightning's sacred swordsman Cassius. He actually defected to Ian." When the Sword of Justice secret police saw the lightning's sacred swordsman Cassius behind Yang Feng, their complexions suddenly changed dramatically, and their eyes filled with dread and graveness. The lightning sacred swordsman Cassius was definitely one of the top sacred swordsmen in the St. Toulon city. His sword Dao cultivation base was extremely terrifying, even stronger than Dassault's. Edith had a look of disbelief on his face, as if he had seen his idol degenerate. He said bitterly, "Lightning sacred swordsman Cassius, you defected to Ian." A dignified sacred swordsman defected to Ian and became his lackey. Where's your integrity as a sacred swordsman? Integrity as a sacred swordsman. Cassius laughed involuntarily and swept Edith with a glance, as if he was looking at an insensible child. He hadn't agreed to the solicitations of the greater aristocrats because the price offered by them was too low. The lightning sacred swordsman Cassius was born into an ordinary commoner family. Relying on his talent in swordsmanship and countless painstaking efforts, he was promoted to a sacred swordsman step by step. In the extremely strict hierarchy of the Morince Empire, even the status of a sacred swordsman was only slightly higher than that of an ordinary aristocrat. But compared to a greater aristocrat, it couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. An aristocratic child like Edith naturally didn't know that the greatest goal and desire of many commoner sacred swordsmen was to become a hereditary greater aristocrat with their own fief. Of course, very few sacred swordsmen could achieve this goal. Since Cassius had obtained an opportunity to become a greater aristocrat with his peerless swordsmanship, he naturally wouldn't let it go. Cassius said lightly, "I am Earl Ian's retainer. Whoever wants to harm Sir Earl will have to ask the sword in my hand." A look of despair flashed through Edith's eyes. With two sacred swordsmen joining hands, Edith, who was a newly promoted sacred swordsman, had no chance. Yang Feng's eyes flashed with killing intent and he said coldly, "Sir Daoism, Edith is stubborn." He stubbornly resisted arrest and wholeheartedly sheltered the witch of the Titan Empire. I think that he should be killed on the spot. Otherwise, I will report everything that happened today to His Majesty. For Edith to be able to break through on the spot, such a person was definitely a genius among geniuses, a freakish powerhouse. Since such an expert was Yang Feng's enemy, it was better for Yang Feng to kill such an enemy as soon as possible. Dassault's complexion changed slightly, and his eyes flashed with a look of struggle. He turned around and stared at Edith, and his gaze became more and more gloomy. After all, Daoism was a sacred swordsman who had been famous for a long time and was at the peak of his age and body. If he hadn't been lenient, Edith would have died more than 10 times just now. As one of the 5 tycoons of the Sword of Justice, Daoism couldn't hide the truth from the masses after all. If Edith continued to resist stubbornly, then for the sake of his future and his family, Daoism could only go against his conscience, arrest Edith and Faldina, and report the truth to his superiors. "Edith, what are you doing? Hurry up and capture the Titan empires which behind you and offer her to His Majesty the Great Emperor." With a stern shout, Iser slowly stepped into the room. His gaze swept past Yang Feng and Cassius before finally falling on Edith, and he barked. Fear flashed in Edith's eyes as he said loudly, "Father, she's my—" Iser glared at Edith and shouted, "Shut up." She was the witch of the Titan Empire and a criminal appointed by His Majesty. If you can't catch her, our Hansen family might even be destroyed. Think about your mother, think about your sister, Think about your uncle who loves you the most. Think about your aunt. Think about your cute little nephews. Do you want their heads to roll on the ground because of you? Do you want to destroy our Hansen family because of that witch? When Edith heard that, he suddenly felt cold all over, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. His face paled and his body trembled. The voices and smiles of all the relatives in the Hansen family flashed through his mind. It was like a mountain pressing down on his heart, causing his hands to tremble uncontrollably. He no longer had the firmness and strength from before. Face pale, Faldina looked at Edith in a daze. She didn't say a word, didn't plead, didn't get angry. She just looked at her most beloved lover and waited for his judgment. Iser barked. The life and death, honor and disgrace of the more than 100,000 members of the Hansen family are in your hands. Capture her, and our Hansen family will have a chance to survive. Edith, capture her. Edith's mind was in chaos, and his body trembled. Iser barked. Think about your mother, Edith, think about your mother. When Edith thought of his mother, who loved him dearly since childhood, who paid an unknown amount of blood, sweat, and tears for him, his mind was in chaos. The sword in his hand trembled, and he stabbed Faldina in the abdomen. Drops of bright red blood flowed out of Faldina's abdomen like bright red flowers, blooming with poignant beauty. Faldina's beautiful big eyes were dyed black, and endless despair swallowed her beautiful eyes, leaving only deathly stillness. Edith looked at the bright red, the sword in his hand fell to the ground, and he screamed with a look of horror, "No, dear, no, it wasn't me." Iser barked, "Edith, capture her." Iser's voice seemed to have a magical power. Edith seemed to be hypnotized, and he grabbed Faldina's shoulder for some reason. Chapter 265. Faldina's eyes were filled with deathly stillness. Suddenly, she sensed that her sealed power had all returned to her body. Boom! Along with a loud noise, the floor in the area where Faldina was located collapsed strangely, and she fell to the ground together with Edith. Faldina's gaze was ice-cold. She pointed at Edith, and a dozen-plus arcane projectiles blasted into Edith without mercy. Caught off guard, Edith barely managed to urge the chi protection of a junior sacred swordsman, before he was hit by the dozen-plus arcane projectiles and sent flying. The moment he was hit by the arcane projectiles, Edith's eyes were filled with shock and incredulity, yet he was still sent flying by the powerful impact. Faldina silently recited an incantation, pointed with a finger, and launched the level 1 spell Dark Mist. Endless darkness and dense mist gushed out in a flash and covered everyone in the room. In the endless darkness and dense fog, Dassault's eyes flashed with a dignified glint, and he took out a jade card. The jade card radiated fluctuations of divine technique power, and white rays of light shot out of the jade card. Illuminated by the white light, the dark mist was instantly dispelled. Faldina was an extremely powerful archwizard, which the Knights of the Sword of Justice already knew. Dassault also carried many magic restraining treasures. The moment the dark mist was dispelled, Dassault's figure blurred, and he shot into the big hole like a bolt of lightning. Fireballs, icicles, wind blades, and various other level 1 spells burst out of the huge hole and bombarded Desser crazily. A resplendent sword ray shone. Spurred by sacred swordsman rank Chi, a powerful sword circle suddenly erupted and swept away the elemental spells. The numerous level 1 spells were completely shattered by Desser's sword circle. The chi of the Feisua plane was similar to the life energy cultivated by warlocks of the Zhangji plane. Although the grade and potential of chi couldn't compare to that of the life energy cultivated by warlocks, but its power was unpredictable. Once it erupted, it was extremely powerful and could crush many low-level spells. The various level 1 spells only blocked Dassault for a moment, when a pair of wings of the wind appeared behind Faldina. Like a fairy, she smashed through the door of the hotel and flew outside. Weakness. Petrification ray. Spider web. Fear. Stun. Faldina had just rushed out of the hotel, when dozens of debuff spells slammed into her. Dazzling crystals flew out of Faldina and formed a diamond-shaped magic shield. When the various negative spells fell on the rhombus-shaped magic shield, they immediately collapsed and disappeared. The countless magic rhombus crystals were a legendary secret treasure, the magic crystal net. Under Faldina's control, no level 1 or level 2 spells could hurt her until her mental strength was exhausted. While withstanding the attacks of countless spells, Faldina seemed to have transformed into a huge bird and flew toward an alley on the side. The terrain of the Saint Toulon city was very complicated. As long as Faldina escaped into the complicated alleys, she would be able to escape alive. Soul shock. An archmage silently chanted an incantation, pointed at Faldina, and cast the level 3 spell Mind Shock. In midair, Faldina's delicate body suddenly shook, and like a bird with broken wings, she fell from midair towards the ground. The magic crystal net was extremely profound. It could weaken the power of most level 3 spells, but it could not make people completely immune to the attacks of level 3 spells. Binding of the air. Another archmage silently chanted an incantation and pointed his wand at Faldina. Countless streams of air condensed frantically, forming chains that rolled towards Faldina and tightly entangled her. As soon as Faldina came to her senses, she poured formidable spirit force into the crystal net, and the crystal net radiated powerful magic light and dispelled the atmospheric shackles. Asterisk cough. Asterisk cough. Suddenly, Faldina bent over, covered her mouth, and coughed. Drops of blood dripped from her lily-white fingers to the ground. An archmage sighed slightly, and his eyes flashed with admiration. What an amazing young lady! She has the cultivation base of an archmage at such a young age. Unfortunately, she is a person of the Titan Empire. Faced with the siege of dozens of wizards coupled with the attacks of 2 archmages, Faldina still almost escaped. In addition to the legendary secret treasure magic crystal net, her own strength was top-notch. Weakness. Fear. Stun. Spells fell from the sky and landed on Faldina's body, but they were blocked by the secret treasure crystal net. Every time a spell was blocked, the magic crystal net dimmed a bit, and Faldina's face became a bit paler. The 2 archmages silently recited incantations, and a series of binding spells fell on Faldina. If Morince 2867th wanted a living Faldina, then she had to live. This was the power possessed by the Emperor of the Morince Empire, the most powerful human empire on the Feisua plain. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, the street was engulfed by a huge explosion. Amidst the terrifying explosions, the knights and mages of the Sword of Justice were completely engulfed by the terrifying explosions. Smoke and dust rose, and countless fragments of stone splashed about. At the moment of the explosion, the mages cast defensive spells on themselves one after another. The 2 archmages took a few steps back, silently chanted an incantation, and enchanted themselves with defensive spells. After the smoke and dust of the explosions completely dispersed, everyone had unsightly expressions on their faces as they discovered that Faldina, who had been stabbed in the abdomen and was like a turtle in a jar, had disappeared. Standing in the tavern, Yang Feng looked outside, sneered, and ridiculed. The Hansen family is really good. They even let go of someone that His Majesty wants. It seems that the relationship between the witch and Edith is really close. In the tavern room, Edith curled up into a ball in a daze, held his head in his hands, and looked like a good-for-nothing. Iser smiled faintly and inverted the truth. Earl Ian, the Hansen family is loyal and devoted to His Majesty. My son, Edith, stabbed the witch with a sword. My son, Edith, has never really loved the witch. He just wanted to use her to get information on the Titan Empire. Oh, is that so? Did I misunderstand Edith? With a look of surprise on his face, Yang Feng looked at the zombie-like Edith and said with a faint smile, Edith, you never really loved Faldina. You just wanted to use her to get information on the Titan Empire. Is that true? The zombie-like Edith opened his eyes and stared at Yang Feng. His gem-like eyes, which were more beautiful than many beautiful women, were filled with resentment. Iser sternly shouted, Edith, answer Earl Ian's words directly. The Hansen family is the pillar of the Morin's empire and the most loyal subjects of His Majesty the Emperor. Come and tell him yourself. Edith's body trembled slightly. With great difficulty, he bit his lips and enunciated each syllable. I, Edith, have never loved Faldina. I just wanted to use her to get information on the Titan Empire. As soon as the words left his mouth, Edith bit his lips until they bled, and drops of blood dripped from his lips to the ground. His spirit seemed to have been sucked out by that one sentence. He slumped on the bed like a dead man, without any signs of life. It's a pity. It seems that I misunderstood you. I will report today's matter to His Majesty the Emperor in its entirety. Goodbye then. The corners of Yang Feng's mouth rose slightly, then he turned and strode outside. Following behind Yang Feng, the lightning sacred swordsman Cassius remained vigilant, on guard against the Sword of Justice's secret police. Dassault looked at Yang Feng's back with a dignified look in his eyes and said slowly, "This guy is very dangerous." With a cold look in his eyes, Iser sighed slowly and said regretfully, "He recruited the lightning sacred swordsman Cassius. He's getting more and more difficult to deal with. Damn the Orthics family." If Iser hadn't coveted the wealth of the Miracle City, he wouldn't have pushed the hunting Fong core of the Morin's empire to attack the Miracle City. The Orthics family didn't support Yang Feng at the time, and instead pushed him to the status of a hereditary peer earl. In Iser's eyes, the Miracle City wasn't too difficult to deal with. Now that Yang Feng had become a hereditary peer earl of the Morin's empire and had the lightning sacred swordsman Cassius by his side, it became more difficult to deal with him. As the city master of the Miracle City, Yang Feng had great wealth. And as a hereditary peer earl of the Morin's empire, he could turn that wealth into his own strength. Iser could easily guess that more and more sacred swordsmen would join Yang Feng's camp in the St. Toulon city. After all, Yang Feng had the vast territory of the Red Earth Wasteland. Even if he divided 10,000 baronies, it wouldn't hurt Yang Feng's vitality. The Orthics family also took a fancy to Yang Feng's potential, which was why they supported him and pulled him into their camp. Not far from the villa, in the hidden basement of an ordinary house, Faldina gasped for breath, her face pale, and blood dripped from her abdomen to the ground. Chapter 266. The door of the basement suddenly opened, and a figure slowly entered. "Ian, it's really you." Faldina slowly raised her head and looked at the figure walking into the basement. Her beautiful eyes flickered with a peculiar light, making it impossible to see what she was thinking. Yang Feng smiled and sat down in front of Faldina. "Yes, it's me. It was you who led the Sword of Justice here." "Yes, it was me who pressured the Sword of Justice to come here. You're the one who sealed my power. I was the one who drugged you and sealed your power." Faldina was silent for a while, her face twisted, and she gritted her teeth, asking, "Why?" Yang Feng replied with a smile on his face, "I should be asking you that. I am a person who advocates the concept of equality between men and women. As for the woman who wants to destroy my family, I feel that she should taste the same pain. No, I should let her taste the pain on top of that. Only then will I be happy." "Did Edith's sword strike hurt you?" Faldina was silent for a while. Then she bit her lips and blood dripped to the ground, saying, It hurt a lot. The previous Faldina was stabbed to death by that suffocating pain." "Then I'll let you listen to a real and interesting conversation." Yang Feng smiled, took out a sound recording crystal, and poured his spirit force into it. "Edith, you never really loved Faldina. You just wanted to use her to get information on the Titan Empire. Is this true?" Yang Feng's voice suddenly sounded in the secret room. Faldina's face was pale. She twisted her hands, and blood dripped from her lily-white hands to the ground. "I, Edith, never loved Faldina. I just wanted to use her to get information on the Titan Empire." Edith's pained and strained voice resounded in the secret chamber word by word, stabbing Faldina's heart like a sharp knife. Faldina vomited a large mouthful of blood. Her face became extremely pale, and her eyes were shrouded in endless silence. She whispered, "You demon!" With a look of ridicule on his face, Yang Feng looked at Faldina, who vomited blood. There was no trace of sympathy on his face, only unspeakable pleasure. Soon after, Yang Feng sneered and said, "Likewise, I admit that I'm not a good person. What about you guys? Are you the good guys?" Faldina's face was pale. She twisted her hands and said, "Don't you want to know the secret of the artifact?" Yang Feng said lightly, "It's best if I can know the secrets of the divine armament, but if I can't, then it doesn't matter. How could a treasure like a divine artifact be so easily obtained unless it was by chance? If you can obtain a divine artifact just by knowing its secret, wouldn't it have fallen into your hands a long time ago?" Faldina was a genius mage. She had already reached the realm of Archmage at a young age, and it was not impossible for her to become a legendary mage in the future. For such a genius to know the secrets of the divine armament yet not be able to obtain it, the difficulty of obtaining the divine armament could be well imagined. The corners of Faldina's mouth rose into a smile of ridicule. The apple of wisdom is about to ripen. Yang Feng's complexion suddenly changed greatly, his mind was in turmoil, his body trembled, and he leaned forward. His eyes exuding malevolence and greed, he exclaimed, "The apple of wisdom! Isn't it still 372 years before it ripens?" The apple of wisdom was the most precious and legendary treasure of the Feisua Plain. It was the treasure that countless powerhouses of the Feisua Plain coveted the most. Among the countless plains, there was only one wisdom apple tree that existed. The apple of wisdom tree sprouted 10,000 years, bloomed 10,000 years, and bore fruit 10,000 years. Each time, only one apple of wisdom would be born. As long as anyone ate an apple of wisdom, no matter how much of a waste they were before, they would possess terrifying wisdom and become a super freakish cultivation genius. They would be able to easily comprehend any kind of knowledge with a glance. People who ate an apple of wisdom and didn't die before they matured basically became bigwigs. The strong divine force rank radiant primary god Prados of the Xalia divine system had once eaten an apple of wisdom. On the Feisua Plain, the radiant primary god Prados was the most powerful strong divine force rank god. When the Tsangji Plain dominated the Feisua Plain, each apple of wisdom was an indispensable tribute of the Feisua Plain. Only warlock emperors of the warlock dynasties were qualified to enjoy the apple of wisdom, which was a peerless treasure that was born only once every 30,000 years. Such a precious treasure naturally attracted the coveting of many powerful existences. Many planar wars were caused by the apples of wisdom of the Feisua Plain. The Tsangji Plain's demonic fighting sect also had specific records of the apples of wisdom. According to the latest intelligence, the apple of wisdom should take 372 years to ripen. Yang Feng took the initiative to come to the Feisua Plain because he coveted the apple of wisdom. Once he could get his hands on the apple of wisdom, his wisdom would increase by leaps and bounds, and his cultivation would yield twice the results with half the effort. Faldina said with a sweet smile, "Earl Ian, it seems that your origin isn't simple. You even know about the apple of wisdom." On the Feisua Plain, all kinds of information about the apple of wisdom had been deleted by the gods. Apart from divine descendant families with ancient inheritances and the core upper echelon of churches, no one knew about the existence of the apple of wisdom. An apple of wisdom might be able to change the fate of an ordinary person and turn them into a god lofty in a divine country. The gods in the starry sky didn't want ordinary people to know about this because they also wanted to get their hands on a treasure like the apple of wisdom. Forcibly suppressing his excitement and greed, Yang Feng took a deep breath and said solemnly, "What do you want? As long as it's reasonable, I can agree to it." Faldina's beautiful eyes flashed with resentment, and she said unhurriedly in a voice that seemed to come from the netherworld, "I want to follow you and watch how you destroy the Hansen family." Yang Feng frowned slightly and said, "He's a member of the Hansen family." Faldina touched the wound on her lower abdomen, which was no longer bleeding. Traces of pain came from the wound, shrouding her beautiful eyes in a shadow. She revealed a bewitching smile. "It's because he's a member of the Hansen family that I want to destroy the Hansen family. I want him to pay the price for today's sword strike." "Alright. I agree." Yang Feng pondered for a while. He couldn't figure out what Faldina was thinking, so he simply stopped thinking about it. He silently recited an incantation, pointed at Faldina, and cast a lie detection spell on her. Apart from the believers of the Xalia pantheon, the god of lies and deceit, who had the minor divine power of lies and deceit, as well as some strange treasures, even a legendary level powerhouse would be affected by the lie detection spell. Among the gods of the Titan divine system, there was no god similar to the god of lies and deception. Unless Faldina had one of the few treasures forged by Yasuo circulating in the world, she might be able to resist the lie detection spell. The Apple of Wisdom is located at the end of the world, on an island in the middle of the Golden Strait. In ancient times, before the gods were born, there was once a powerful devil called the Time Lord who cast a spell that the gods couldn't defy in the Golden Strait. Yang Feng was silent. The Time Lord, known as one of the strongest experts in the history of the Zhangji Plain, also came to the Feisua Plain and took away an Apple of Wisdom. Shrouded by that spell, the Golden Strait became a forbidden area for gods. Any demigod who ignited their divine fire or a god with a godhead would be deprived of all their power and turned into an ordinary person once they entered the Golden Strait. The Apple of Wisdom tree takes 10,000 years to sprout, 10,000 years to blossom, and 10,000 years to bear fruit. This cannot be changed. However, the false gods of the Xalia divine system, the goddess of life, the goddess of plants, and the goddess of forests, join hands and send people to the Apple of Wisdom tree every year. They spend countless precious divine power and treasures to nourish the Apple of Wisdom tree, and finally advance the maturity of the Apple of Wisdom by more than 300 years. In other words, in 3 years, the Apple of Wisdom will mature. Faldina said faintly. Yang Feng's thoughts stirred, and he exclaimed in admiration, as expected of the gods of the Xalia divine system, how clever! An Apple of Wisdom was a peerless treasure that could trigger a planar war. Every time an Apple of Wisdom appeared, countless experts would gather on the Feisua Plain for a war. Even though the gods of the Feisua Plain could take advantage of their geographical advantage to gain the upper hand and be virtually undefeated, but there would still be gods who would fall and consume their power. Once the Apple of Wisdom ripened ahead of time, the gods could take away the Apple of Wisdom ahead of time and avoid the war. For the gods, who had at least a lifespan of millions of years, it would be best if they didn't have to fight to the death. Yang Feng suddenly asked, "How do you know when the Apple of Wisdom will ripen?" Faldina said faintly, "The Apple of Wisdom can change the fate of mortals and give them a chance to become gods. In addition to gods, mortals are also very tempted by the Apple of Wisdom." The gods of the Feisua Plain were aloof and ruled over everything, and their lifespans were practically endless. Ordinary people didn't matter. However, although the powerhouses at the apex of the world crawled at the feet of the gods, but they also longed to take a step forward and become a member of the gods. Even the members of divine descendant families were no exception. Members of divine descendant families were blessed by the gods at birth and had a lifespan and formidable cultivation talent far beyond that of ordinary people. However, they would also die of old age, and they longed to become gods. Chapter 267. The White Tower was located in the west of the Victory Palace. It was a 100-meter-tall, 9-story-tall magic tower made of white secret corundum. It was the only magic tower in the St. Toulon city. The White Tower was the headquarters of the court masters. Inside the White Tower, the top wizards of the Morince Empire who sided with the court gathered, and there was even no lack of legend-rank wizards. A luxurious carriage slowly approached from afar along the Bluestone Road and stopped in front of the White Tower. Dressed in a pure white court Grand Master robe, Yang Feng slowly alighted from the luxurious carriage and looked at the tall White Tower. Hereditary peer-grader aristocrats of the Morince Empire generally lived in their territories, acting like local tyrants. Very few of them held real positions in the court of the Morince Empire. Since Yang Feng, a hereditary peer earl, could become a court Grand Master, it was both a grace and a means to put him under reasonable house arrest in the St. Toulon city. Although Morince 2867 was a cruel, lecherous, and incapable ruler in the eyes of many people, but he didn't lack some means that an emperor should have. Yang Feng slowly stepped into the White Tower. As soon as he entered the White Tower, Yang Feng saw apprentice wizards and wizards shuttling back and forth inside the White Tower in a hurry. Every magic apprentice was a respected existence in the outside world, but here, they were nothing more than servants. As for official wizards, which were very difficult to see in the outside world, they could be seen everywhere here. From time to time, fearsome spirit fluctuations of legend wizards spread from the top of the White Tower. Clearly, there were legend wizards conducting various magic experiments inside the White Tower. A big white dog came up to Yang Feng and spoke in human language. "Excuse me, are you the court Grand Master Ian?" Yang Feng looked curiously at the big white dog. His eyes flickered with a brilliant light, and he discovered that the big dog wasn't a demonic beast-like extraordinary life form. "I am." The big white dog said, "My name is Ola. I'm a level 1 court master. Please come with me." Yang Feng followed behind the big white dog and entered the White Pagoda. Yang Feng asked curiously, "Why were you turned into a dog?" Olga smiled bitterly. "As an assistant, I participated in one of Asenho's large-scale experiments, but I made a mistake and ruined the experiment. As a result, Asenho used a transformation spell on me and turned me into a dog. I have to live as a dog for a month." Although it was very difficult for the Feisua Plains wizards to reach the pinnacle due to the weave, but wizards had a lot of means, and all kinds of strange spells emerged one after another. The polymorph spell that turned people into dogs was just a level 3 spell. Olga came to a large hall and pointed. "This is your room. Your subordinates are inside." "They're already inside." Yang Feng looked up and saw a door plate hanging in the upper right corner of the hall, 13th Magic Brigade. From today onwards, he was a royal archmage and the captain of the 13th Magic Brigade. All the royal mages in the 13th Magic Brigade were his direct subordinates. Yang Feng pushed open the door and entered. Inside the reception hall, there were 59 court masters, each of whom was carefully studying a magic book. When Yang Feng entered, they only raised their eyelids and glanced at him, before continuing to read the magic books in their hands with indifferent expressions on their faces. The hall was filled with indifference and rejection. In this hall, there were 8 great magicians and 1 magic shooter. No one thought that Yang Feng, who had no qualifications and strength, could become their captain. Yang Feng said faintly, "I am Ian. From today onwards, I am your head." There was silence. Wizards were a very proud group of people. Even though they had defected to the Morince Empire's court and became its lackeys, but they were still very proud. If Yang Feng was a legend wizard, then these court masters would be happy to obey Yang Feng's orders. If Yang Feng was a court master and had the strength of an archwizard, then these court masters would also obey Yang Feng's orders. However, even if Yang Feng was a hereditary pure greater aristocrat, as a mere foreign great wizard, it would still be difficult for him to order these proud court masters around. Yang Feng smiled faintly. The reaction of the court masters was completely within his expectations. Yang Feng said unhurriedly, "I have obtained His Majesty's permission to build a magic college in the St. Toulon city, a magic college that can teach legend wizards. I lack teachers. I came here to recruit some teachers. Who among you would like to become the Empire's first magic college, a magic college teacher that can teach legend wizards?" When these words came out, ripples were finally set off among the stagnant court masters. The court masters looked up at Yang Feng with ridicule in their eyes. On the Feisua plane, legend wizards were the most powerful beings under the demigod rank. Even the Broken Star Sacred Swordsman, who was known to be able to slay demigods, had no more than a 20% chance of winning if he was 100 meters away from a legend wizard. For a sacred swordsman like the lightning sacred swordsman Cassius, once he was 100 meters away from a legend wizard, only death would await him. Legendary mages were so powerful, but they were also extremely few in number. In the Morince Empire's imperial court, there were less than 10 legend wizards among the court grandmasters. As for magic notes about the promotion to legend wizards, they were even more precious, rarely seen by ordinary people. Even court mages like them had to make great contributions or have extraordinary talent to be able to read the legendary mage's magic notes. A middle-aged archwizard with some white hair, dressed in a black wizard robe and a level 3 court master badge on his chest, looked up at Yang Feng with ridicule in his eyes. Court Grandmaster Ian, I am the level 3 court master Barros. Unless you can defeat me, anything you say here is bullshit. Barros had been a level 3 court master for 10 years. He had been working hard for the position of court grand master for 5 years. As a result, when Yang Feng came, he snatched the position of court grand master, filling his heart with anger and jealousy. Even though Yang Feng was a hereditary peer grader aristocrat, but he still couldn't hold back his anger. Yang Feng said lightly, "So, as long as I defeat you, then I'll be the real head here?" Barros sneered, "That's right. The sole mission of us court masters is to protect His Majesty and the Saint Toulon city, which requires fighting strength. As long as you can defeat me, then you'll be the head of the 13th Magic Brigade." Yang Feng looked at the court masters and said slowly, "If I defeat Barros, then you'll obey my orders?" A great wizard stood up and looked straight at Yang Feng without any fear, saying, "Earl Ian, if you can defeat Master Barros, then I, Bessa, will submit to you." A great wizard also stood up and said solemnly, "That's right. Earl Ian, if you can defeat Master Barros, then I, Bessa, will submit to you." One after another, the court masters stood up and said loudly, their eyes flashing with contempt. For a great wizard to challenge an archwizard, that was simply courting death. The court masters of the Morance Empire specialized in combat, and their fighting strength far surpassed that of ordinary wizards. Barros had even killed 2 high mages. Even among high mages, he was an outstanding powerhouse. Yang Feng revealed a smile and said, "So I just have to defeat you? It's that simple." "It's simple." Barros' eyes suddenly flashed with anger. Ever since he became a wizard, no one had ever looked down on him. Those who had looked down on him were already dead. Now he met someone who looked down on him, and he was now an extremely respected archwizard. On the Feisua plane, the status of wizards had always been much higher than that of warriors. The status of an archwizard was even higher than that of a sacred swordsman. There were many things that the power of magic could accomplish, while the chi of a sacred swordsman couldn't. And if an archwizard was prepared, they could even hunt down a sacred swordsman. Yang Feng said lightly, "Barros, let's exchange pointers." Barros said with a cold smile, "All right, Earl Ian, if you win, then henceforth, I'll be your most loyal subordinate. If you lose, please resign from your position as a court grand master." Once Yang Feng resigned from his position as a court grand master, then Barros would have hope of becoming a court grand master, gaining great power and status, as well as being able to read more advanced magic notes. In the court master system, the higher the status of a person, the more resources they could obtain. Such a system could motivate the court mages and make them work harder. Yang Feng said with a confident smile, "All right, if I lose, then I'll resign from my position as a court grand master." Barros got up and said lightly, "Then let's go to the magic arena." Yang Feng replied, "All right." Just after Yang Feng agreed, magic radiances lit up in the reception hall, and the court masters quickly spread the news throughout the White Tower. They wanted the entire White Tower to bear witness to this wager. In this way, if Yang Feng lost and was unwilling to fulfill his promise, then even if he was a greater aristocrat with a distinguished status, he wouldn't have a foothold in the White Tower. Yang Feng looked at the unbridled magic radiance, and the corners of his mouth rose into a smile. "It seems that I'm really not popular." Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.